a real pleasure to be here. And Nick introduced me well in a way. I really like to interact with people when I talk. So for me, it's going to be a challenge today a little bit because it's difficult to walk around and sit with you and talk to you and things like that. But this is the challenge that I will be talking about more. And this is the challenge that we are all facing now. Let's face it, working online is different than working face-to-face. So we'll talk a lot about that and how to compensate, how to mitigate for disadvantages of working online. But I want to first of all to say one thing. I believe, this is my assumption, that most of you are here actually because ultimately you want to improve your practice. You want to do your job better. And this is actually going to be the main focus of my presentation. Of course, the magical presence and discussing various modalities which we work play a part in that. But essentially, my focus will be, and hopefully I'll be able to, you will come out with you will get something from this talk that would help you to improve your already, I'm sure, a good practice, but to make it even better. I'll just say very briefly, say a few words of about what I'm doing. And I'm the program leader and the founder of a personal consultancy model and program leader at the University of Wales London of the first, and I think still the only master's program in the integrative counseling and coaching. So we use personal consultancy for that kind of integration. And very briefly, the summary of what we do, we actually train our students to do authentic listening, which is enabling the client to express themselves, share their experiences, and clarify where they want to be. So this is, I guess you're all familiar with that. That's what you do anyway. Then on the rebalancing stage, we use counseling skills to help the clients locate and deal with their internal conflicts and barriers. These things that are going on inside themselves. Sometimes it may involve going to the addressing some past experiences or past traumas and so on. Then on the generating stage, we use coaching skills to help the client make some concrete changes and realize their goals. And then on the supporting stage, we help the client sustain, we train our students to help the client sustain that positive change. It's kind of common sense. And it summarizes the way that we combine counseling and coaching skills. And it's very popular among our, we have, every year, we have a few hundred applicants for 48 places. Very popular among students and also clients. Clients are happy to work using personal consultancy, the personal consultancy model, because in a way, why not? To get two for the price of one in some ways. But all these wonderful things, all these things that we do would not, my feeling is that they wouldn't really work if there wasn't something that underlies all of them, and that's the presence. The presence is something that really is the most important ingredient, without which none of these things would work well, or most of the time they wouldn't work well. Some of you may have heard of Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers was the founder of person-centered therapy and one of the most famous figures in the field of one-to-one practices. And towards the end of his life, he wrote something quite interesting. I'm inclined to think that in my writing, I have stressed too much the three basic conditions. These three basic conditions, congruence, unconditional positive regard, and empathic understanding, kind of sometimes called core skills that almost every counseling and therapy training is trained their students in. So this is considered the basis of counseling profession. So Rogers then said towards the end of his life, he said, perhaps it's something around the edges of those conditions that is really the most important element of therapy. When myself is very clearly and obviously present. So he himself concluded that there's even something more important than those three conditions that he's famed for, and that's presence. Okay, so now the question is, what is presence? And I think I'm not going to get in very much into some kind of details and some sort of complicated definitions. Very simply, it's being fully engaged, bringing one's whole self into the encounter with the client. Now, in theory, that seems very simple, and I think that probably most of you take it for granted and think, yeah, of course I do that. Of course I do that. But actually, in practice, it's the most challenging aspect of our profession, that underlying everything we do. You can never be actually master of presence. You can never say, okay, that's it. I'm there. I got it. You know, it's like, to me, presence, it's like meditation in relation to another human being. And you have to do it. You have to practice on a daily basis. That kind of relating, that kind of unique relating. And I'll talk more about that, what I mean by that unique relating later on. Now, I'm sure that you know these things, that being present has many benefits. And if you get ChatGPT, GPT, it will come up with some of these things, I'm sure. So building trust. So clear clients are more likely to open up if you're fully present. Understanding the client, not just cognitively, but understanding them experientially. That's what presence is. Why presence is important. Validation. When you're fully present, clients feel validated. And also, your presence encourages the client to be present, which increases their own self-awareness and allows the session to get into that wonderful state of flow. You know, when you kind of forget about the time and just a session is kind of flowing and a wonderful interaction, which makes our job so enjoyable. And also, of course, it enables that real connection between you and your client. But what I really want to focus on, and this is what I was saying earlier on, I want to focus on this bit. Presence is essential in developing a highly attuned connection that can lead to not only effectively working together, but also producing lasting positive outcome. At this stage, I would like to ask everybody what is the what you think is the biggest challenge in our profession. But obviously, I mean, it's kind of probably difficult to do that. So I'll tell you what I think that the biggest challenge is. The greatest challenge for our profession is what happens is in the session doesn't always translate into positive change out there. This is what I find always, you know, I'm sure that you had also experienced many times having a wonderful session with a client, and you think, wow, that's it. That's really, we hit jackpot now. And then the next week or next time, your client comes along and nothing changed. Nothing changed much out there. And that's because we are not there when important things happen. Let's say if you have a 1 hour session or 50-minute session a week with your client, right? So that means that you have 167 hours not with your client. A lot of things happen in these 167 hours. You're only with them for 1 hour, for 50 minutes, right? So let's be very honest about that. We cannot, my starting point of this talk is we cannot help clients. We can only help them to help themselves. We can only help clients to help themselves. That's because they have to make the real change happens out there in the real world, and they have to do that change. In a way, it's having a good session, it's relatively easy. I'm sure that all of you have had many good sessions with your clients. What the real challenge is translating that good session into good life. And for that, we need a bit of magic. Let me tell you what I mean by magic. So, okay, so now you can see your slides very well. I can't, but that doesn't matter. I can live without it. Okay, so what's that magic? Consistent findings is that when people converse or share an experience, let me just, sorry. Their brainwaves synchronize. I wonder if you have known about that. This is a fact that's been around for about at least 10 years. Neurons in corresponding locations of the different brains fire at the same time, creating matching patterns, like dancers moving together. Higher order brain areas seem to behave similarly during more challenging tasks, such as making meaning out of something seen or heard. The experience of being on the same wavelength as another person is real, and it is visible in the activity of the brain. Even scientists occasionally use the word magic when talking about it. This is something amazing. We actually synchronize, kind of, and when we do our job well, your brain and client's brain synchronize. And being on the same wavelength maximizes the chances that the client will carry on with positive change in between sessions. So the client, that kind of client practitioner alliance secures working collaboratively and motivates the clients to make change out there in the real world. And that's what we want. This is what justifies our job. This is what ultimately really matters. But what kind of relating to the other is most conducive to making this happen? Well, let's consult a mystic. That mystic is this guy. His name is Martin Buber, and he is an existential philosopher and the author, very famous for writing the book I and Thou. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is now exactly 100 years since the book was written. I think he wrote the book sometime in 1920s. And yet it is still a book that is very much relevant and important for all of us. It's very short. It's kind of not very big, but it's a little bit written in kind of somewhat obscure language, so not very easy to understand, although the basic principles are very, very simple. So Martin Buber observed that there are different ways we relate to each other. He proposed that we relate to each other as I, it, relating to the other as an object, and I, thou. And this is relating to each other in a very different way, with an increased permeability between individual ego boundaries to the point of no separation. This is that wonderful sense when you kind of almost feel that you are not exactly one with another person, but that there is no barrier, there is no that kind of some kind of barriers between you and the other person. There is kind of, if you like, your energy flows freely between you and that other person. I introduced the third category, I, you. That's not Martin Bobo didn't talk about that. This is what I'm interested in, because I also realized that actually in a lot of interactions, we relate to the other as subject. So it's not I, it, but it's not yet quite I, thou. So basically, when you talk to let's say a shop assistant in your local corner shop, you may treat them as a subject. You may ask them, how are you today, and have a small talk and so on. So you don't treat them instrumentally, you don't treat them as an object, but you don't have exactly that I-thou relationship. It's very special. So I want to compare how it looks in our settings, how I, you, and I-thou look. So this would be I, you. So you talk to your client talk to you, but you remain within your bubble of your bubble. That the other word for that would be the bubble of your ego boundaries, kind of your space, right? What happens in I, thou is those two bubbles merge, and you are within that kind of big bubble, if you like. And this kind of relationship allows us to be attuned to that inner world of the client and sense what is normally not accessible to us. There is something quite amazing in our profession, and that's that we work with thoughts and emotions and feelings and experiences and past of our clients, but we can't see them. We can only learn indirectly about them from the client, from what the client is saying to us, or their body language. We can't see their emotions. We can't hear their thoughts. However, when you get in that sort of I-thou space, due to something called mirror neurons, we actually have the capacity to sense, to experience what is going on behind their eyeballs. What is their experience? And this is true meaning of empathy. Empathy is not about being nice and feeling sorry for the client. Empathy is understanding the client experientially, which is what is I-thou enables. So let's talk about a little bit, how do we get there in our professional settings? Well, there are three things that are important. Exclusion, what needs to be excluded? Inclusion, what needs to be included? And the right conditions for that. So the inclusion, it's about, it all gets mixed up. So what I mean by that is that we always, every new experience is affected by the existing content of our mind. So let's say that this yellow circle is the existence content of your mind. I know, the content of your mind is much more complicated and much more complex than just yellow blob. But just for sake of the argument, let's imagine that the all content of your mind is that yellow thing. Let's now imagine that a new experience is that blue thing on the other side, right? Now, what happened? What we actually perceive is green. We rarely, if ever, perceive a new experience in uncontaminated way. What I mean by uncontaminated way, in a way that is not actually mixed up like gin and tonic with our own previous experience with the content, with the existing content of our mind. And it is in our nature to do that, to add things. Gestalt psychologists discovered that a long time ago. We automatically, spontaneously, just add things. Look at these images there. You most likely, if you look at a bowl with the spikes, you see the bowl with the spikes? You probably see the bowl with the spikes, but the bowl doesn't exist. You added the bowl. There's no bowl there. How about that triangle up in the left upper corner? It doesn't exist. And you can almost, you can't help it. You see the triangle, but it's not there. You add that. You add this is your mental construct. So this is kind of in our nature to add things. And we do that all the time. You're just not often, most of the time, you're not aware of that. But we do that all the time. We add things all the time. I mean, let me just give you another example. Now you see kind of the upper part of my body, but you don't, I'm sure you don't think for a second that I'm a legless creature. And I don't think that you're legless creatures. It's just in my mind, I add, I make up for, or my mind makes up for what I don't see, so for what is not there. And that's something that is, of course, very useful, and we do that all the time. And it is in our nature to add, but it's in nature of our profession not to add. We actually need to. Sorry, I need to move again. Okay. We need to bracket. We need to move where we need to minimize adding these things, adding anything, or projecting anything on our clients as much as possible. And the method of doing that is called a phenomenological reduction. Phenomenology is developed by Edmund Husserl, and he introduced that method, which is phenomenological reduction is a bit kind of cumbersome term. So many people use the term bracketing instead. And bracketing or letting go our own judgments, assumptions, expectations, and interpretations in order to gain insights from experience rather than pre-existing mental construct is something that is absolutely essential for our practice. You don't want to talk to yourself in your session with clients. And in order to really engage, in order to really connect with another human being that you work with, you need to bracket as much as possible anything that comes from you. And this not only applies to mental projections onto the client, but also onto ourselves. For example, judging ourselves in the session. How many times you think, oh, am I doing well? Am I like, what's going on here? Oh, I shouldn't say that, or something like that. So we simultaneously tend to engage with the client, but also we are engaging with ourselves and projecting things on ourselves or on the relationship. meaning judging the relationship. Is that now session going well, or things like that? So on. All these things are not very helpful. Not very helpful in the session. So what is phenomenological reduction? What that bracketing is something like that. So let's say normally, as I said, we go at that, right? So you all your experiences or whatever the client is saying to you and things like that is mixed with your old projections, mental constructs, and so on. Now, as professionals, counselor, coach, we should do something like this. That I hope that makes sense. What it means, the bracketing, is you kind of bracket, you put aside all your assumptions, all your judgments, interpretations, and so on, so that you can receive in uncontaminated way whatever is coming from the client. So that's about what we need to exclude. We need to exclude things that are coming from us in order to receive things from the client in kind of a more pure form. What we need to include, what is that the other element inclusion, it consists of opening up to the awareness of the client, awareness of yourself, and all in between. That kind of everything that is going on in between. However, this seems to be a little bit of a paradox, right? I mean, I don't know if you ever been in that situation. Of course, in order to focus on your client and be aware of what's going on with the client, you need to be also aware of yourself, right? You need to be aware, for example, if you have some kind of unrelated thoughts that are coming to you, like, oh, what I'm going to have for dinner or something like that, in order to kind of let go of this thinking and let go of anything that can be a distraction. And sometimes people find, yeah, but how can I be like aware of myself and aware of my client and what client is telling me at the same time? Well, this is what I call immersion. The capacity to be simultaneously aware of the client, oneself, and the relationship. And this is only really possible if we are fully immersed in that bubble that I was talking about earlier. So when you are in that bubble, then there is no difference. You can be aware of what's going on inside you and what client is telling you and what's going on between you and the client at the same time simultaneously. And also, these all things need to be somehow connected. And that's what I mean by understanding. So not only understanding the client cognitively, understanding what they're saying, but also understanding them experientially, which what empathy is, and also having that sort of bodily understanding, what Gelden called felt sense, kind of, your body reacts in certain ways to what's going on in the room. It has its own kind of understanding that is beyond just cognitive understanding. And the last but not least are the right conditions for that are necessary in order for you and the client to feel safe to enter into that bubble. What that right conditions are, contracting, boundaries, and reliability. I'm sure that you all do contracting, and you know the value of contracting and the importance of contracting. It really, it's all about you and the client feeling safe and kind of reducing uncertainties. So you may put in your contract something about confidentiality, your fees, your cancellation, and so on. This is all important so that you and the client don't need to think about these things when you're in the sessions. Boundaries very similar to contracting, but more kind of they're more tacit in a way, something that we can't really put in the contract. So, for example, you may want to think about how far you'll be sitting from the client in the sessions. If you are going to have any kind of physical contact, like shaking hands or not, or giving client a hug or something like that. How about lateness, or my favorite about having a mobile phone? If you work face to face, I, for example, don't let my clients to not only to have their phone switched on, but to have their phone out. It has to be in the bag or in their pockets, not kind of outside, because we know that mobile phones actually affect your attention. It reduces your focus and attention for about 10%, even if it's switched off, but it's visible. And the reliability is about physical and social reliability. It's about obviously providing physical, being physically reliable means like providing being there for the client in right in the pre-arranged time and in the space where agreed to meet. But also there is that sort of being psychologically reliable. What it means that you're grounded as a professional sufficiently. The client needs to believe that you're grounded sufficiently so that if they start dysregulating, if they are going to some kind of crisis or things like that, that you'll be able to hold them. We use the term holding. This is, of course, psychological, not physical holding, but psychologically to hold them. And for that, the secret of being able to hold clients, even when they can't hold themselves, if you like, it is necessary for you to be grounded. Okay, now the question is, can we do it online? You can see that these examples here and those drawings here really refer to working face-to-face. An interesting thing is that this is only 2015, so we're talking 8 years ago. So at that time, about 60% of coaches were doing sessions face-to-face. I bet now that things are very, very different. And I want to ask you to lift your hand if you are doing that face. How many of you are doing face-to-face coaching? Lift your hand, please. Okay, lovely. Okay, so there is a good number of people, but how many of you? So I guess about maybe now we have about 200 people here, maybe 10, 15 or something like that. Lifted a hand. If I couldn't see everybody, so maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I get. Maybe yeah, something between 10 and 15. But how many of you are doing online coaching? Oh, wow, wow, wow. Oh gosh, it's like a clear winner. It's sort of as I expected. So probably the situation is the opposite. 8 years later, the situation is the opposite. Most of people are doing actually online coaching, and fewer and fewer people are doing face-to-face. So it's really important that we kind of examine if we can do if we can have that magical presence online. And my belief is that face-to-face work is the most conducive for that, but it is not impossible. It is possible, definitely, to have that online, to have that magical presence online. But it is hard. And let's say it's more difficult. Let's say why it's harder. So we know that that the video-assisted coaching has some kind of advantages. Of course, the convenience. Let's be honest about that. It's more convenient. You can work in your slippers, right? As I'm now giving a talk in my slippers, right? And also, not something to underestimate, a greater pool of possible clients. So you can work in your slippers with somebody on the other side of the globe. It also feels safer in some ways for the practitioners, for the client, and it's more accessible. Coaching and counseling or personal consultancy are more accessible for clients with disabilities that affect their mobility. However, this way online working has a lot of disadvantages too. Technological issues, like some of which I'm kind of experiencing now a little bit, but it's not too bad. Sometimes things can go sometimes things can be much worse, and I'm sure that you all have had some kind of experience with technological glitches and so on. Online fatigue. We get more tired when we work online. And if you have, let's say you have 5 coaching sessions in one day, it's not the same as having 5 coaching sessions face-to-face. Also, the same applying to clients, because clients may have been spending all day working online and then come to see you online. So it is possible to experience that online fatigue, that both of you can experience that. It's harder to secure a private, safe, and quiet space. Distractions and interruptions are more likely. Okay, you can make sure that you secure private and safe and quiet space for yourself, but you can't guarantee that for the client. I don't know if you had those experiences, but I certainly did have. When, let's say, pets would come into the room, a dog or a cat, or children will come into the room. With a cat, I remember one session, and the cat came into the room, and the client started cuddling the cat, and I could see clearly that they have very good eye-thou relationship, but at the expense of our eye-thou relationship. So, and then there are more kind of more sinister things in some ways. This didn't happen to me, but happened to one of my students who reported in his supervision session. He had a session with a client, and they were talking about the client's mother. However, their mother actually left a mobile phone and recorded the whole outside the door and recorded the whole session. And then after the session, she filed complaint to the placement of my student, complaining that they were talking about her, kind of behind her back in the session. Now these things happen. These are not these are not just kind of some kind of jokes or anything like that. These things happen. And it's harder to see. This is what I already mentioned, gave an example of that, harder to secure client confidentiality. There are also these inhibitions. Years ago, I had a client who, we had a lot of coaching sessions already. We moved online. And at one point, he just came with a sandwich. And he said to me, "Oh, you don't mind. I didn't have lunch. I'm going to have a sandwich now." And I was taken aback. I said, "Okay, but I'm sure that he would have never done something like that if we had a face-to-face session." So after that session, I had to kind of think hard, what do I do in these situations? How do I address these things? The sessions may feel less real and emotionally attuned. So in a way, the relationship, it's kind of difficult to really connect on deeper level. It's harder to form working alliance and form connections, and it's harder to hold the client in distress. This is that kind of sinking feeling that you may occasionally experience when you feel that your client is really distressed. They may start crying or get really upset and angry, but you can't reach out. You can reach out, but it's far more difficult to kind of hold them in that sort of state of distress. The trust may be established quicker. This is some research shows that trust can be established more quickly when you work online, but it's more fragile, can be quickly lost too. It's more difficult, interestingly, it's more difficult to remember things in online sessions, and non-verbal communication and information, body language is impaired. This is very often people talk about that because we get clues from the body language so much. We rely on body language. We rely on understanding the client, particularly, this is particularly important if there is kind of discrepancy between the body language and what the client is saying. And yet, when we work online, and particularly when we work on the phone, for example, we can't have that. Our information in this respect is very limited. So it's harder to get in depth, and sessions can be more boring. I mean, it's much more easier to have an engaging sessions when it's face-to-face. It's harder to be experiential in terms of like doing some experiential interventions. And interestingly, one interesting thing that is rarely mentioned, and it's harder for a client to disengage in terms of looking. It's harder to, sometimes clients don't want to look at you. And very often when they talk, when you work with them face to face, they look aside or look down or up or something like that. This is harder to do when you are working online. And it's also, sometimes it feels when you're working online that you're kind of staring at the client all the time, which can be uncomfortable for some. Okay, and the most important thing for us and for this talk is it's harder to establish the presence due to not sharing the same space. One thing that contributes to establishing that bubble and that sense of presence and that magic of presence is that we share the same space. There's immediately something that we have in common. That is not available when you work online. Even the time, it could be even the time difference. So it's morning for you and it's night for your client and so on. This is so make it more difficult. So let's see how we can mitigate for these disadvantages in order with the aim to establish that kind of eye-down relationship and to establish that bubble within which we synchronize our brainwaves. So again, we'll talk about these three elements that I mentioned before. So you need to be aware that the boundaries are more fragile, less solid. So you need to be even more, your contract need to be robust to account for some of these things that I mentioned before. And same applies to the boundaries. So you need to actually, maybe the best thing is to talk to your client about let's say if you would allow them to have a mobile phone on their desk while they're talking to you, or to have a I don't know, food or something like that. And also reliability is very, very important. So you need to be, you need to take extra care that the technology is reliable, that you're familiar with the technology, that you may be having predict that something may go wrong. So have spare mic, spare earpieces, or maybe even a spare laptop, and so on. And also, you need to prepare what to do in emergency. And let's say your client has a heart attack. You may think, what's the chance of something like that happens? But if it happens and you don't do your best to help your clients in that situation, you will feel bad about that the rest of your life. If you knew that you could have done something, but you didn't think about that. So we need to prepare ourselves for these situations and know what to do if some kind of emergency or crisis happens. It doesn't need to be a heart attack. It could be that the client get enraged or something like that. What will you do? And I'm not going to prescribe anything here. So it's just I urge you that you have to think about that in order to decrease that uncertainty and to increase your confidence, because confidence is really about knowing what to do in these situations. Working online involves that uncertainties, more uncertainties than when we work one-to-one, and that increases your anxiety. So to reduce it, we tend to generate and rely more on those mental constructs or our projections that I was talking previously. And so we really need to be even more vigorous, even more diligent in catching these mental projections, acknowledging them and letting them go. And we need to kind of give up fretting about what the client thinks about us and so on. All these things that we project on the client, on us, on the relationship, and is trying to construct out of that, very often out of the anxiety, we try to construct the process, pave the road for the client, but that's not really helpful. You need to, don't forget that you need to do work collaboratively. You both need to do that process. If you do that for the client, it's unlikely that it will work. And our intuition about what needs to be done is less likely to be right, because we have fewer cues on which such intuitions are based when we work online. And last but not least, we need to accept and be comfortable with uncertainties. And for that, you need confidence. You need confidence that you can actually ride on the waves of uncertainties. You see, like a surfer, for example, they don't try to stop the waves or control the waves. They just learn to ride on them. And that's waves are a good example of what uncertainties, life uncertainties, but also uncertainties in our sessions, in our profession, because they are kind of never completely predictable. So we need to develop that confidence in relation to ourselves. So check things with the client more often. It's really important when you work online to not to take anything for granted. Make the implicit explicit. Check with clients more often if whatever you think is right, and manage the luck. The other thing that is also important, that the clients don't have a transition time in between the world out there and the session. Now, some of my clients, I still work face to face mostly, but some of my clients say sometimes that it's really the time is very valuable. They have to walk for about 10 minutes between the place where I work and the train station, the tube station, and that time they need to walk through a park, and that time is very valuable for them because they can actually process what happened in the session. Now, when you work online, the clients have no luxury to do that. So what you need to do, you need to account for that and have a little bit of extra time at the beginning of the session and for clients to kind of decompress, and at the end of the session for the client to process things and be able to engage with the world out there, rather than engaging that and still being open and still being vulnerable. In relation to the process, intend to connect with the client. This is quite interesting, and it can work well. Sometimes you can use visualization, visualize that kind of connection between you and the client. You can visualize that bubble or anything else that works for you. And also bear in mind that you may need to modify some interventions, particularly interventions that involve movement. And if you work, let's say, on a mobile phone, with on the phone, make sure that you remove all the distractions if you're going to walk around, because you don't want to hit the leg of the table and say ouch when you have engaged with the client, right? As for yourself, clear your mental space, secure breaks. As I said, working virtually can be even more tiring. And also make sure that you have pauses. Don't play with your mobile phone in between session. Make sure that you have pauses between. This is really important. Kind of, that's just a one moment of emptying your mind completely, closing the door to the previous session and opening the door for next session. Doesn't need to last long, but it's really important to have that kind of moment of nothingness in between two sessions. And if you lose it, I suggest practicing centering, grounding, and relaxing. I had just yesterday, I had a session with one. It wasn't personal consultancy session, but it was a session practicing. Sorry, not practicing. It was a academic advising session to one of my students, and the technology was not working. And I could feel, because we had very limited time and we had a lot to talk about, and I could feel that I'm getting a little bit annoyed, stressed out, and things like that. And then I just remembered, okay, I'm doing my best. I'm doing what I can in this situation. Let's center, ground, and relax. That took only a few seconds. That made a huge, huge difference. We managed then eventually to do everything in due time. There are actually quite I don't know how many of you work on the phone. There are many advantages of that, right? Again, convenience, greater pool of clients, anonymity, sometimes make people feel safer, lack of visual distractions, ability to move, clients have a greater sense of control, a greater comfort. But there are also additional disadvantages to those disadvantages we already mentioned. Probing and challenging is more difficult. Toxic disinhibition. Phone, I mean, I had stories, horrible stories about toxic disinhibition, and don't want to even I don't want to talk about them today. Phone working can heighten anxiety, difficult to establish robust connection with the client due to lack of visual cues. It's much easier to misunderstand each other, and when the client is in their comfort zone, making change may be actually more difficult. And it's, again, harder to establish the presence. So working on the phone is even more difficult to have that I-thou relationship. So some tips, in addition to what we already discussed, is more frequent encouragers, like saying something like or something like that. Let client know that you're listening, because if you're not, if you're completely silent, they may start thinking that you're not listening to them. Checking understanding with more frequent doing more paraphrasing and summarizing is really important, and then acknowledging and normalizing that without visual contact, talking over each other sometimes may happen, and kind of discussing that with clients that is possible, and encouraging clients to indicate their needs. For example, clients sometimes need to be like need to be silent, and you don't want to panic in these situations. And the way to deal with that uncertainty, what's going on now, it was good, if possible, to kind of encourage client to indicate it, okay, they need to be silent for a while. Again, prepare, clear the space, make sure that notifications, like, and there's nothing more annoying when you're on a phone with a client and you start getting those beep, 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 beeps, things like notifications for text messages or somebody else is calling and so on. Discuss the pros and cons and discuss how you will communicate. And also think how you may feel if the client hangs up. What will you do if the client is dysregulating, if they start crying or getting upset or something like that? In terms of writing, there are advantages of writing too, even greater convenience, greater pool of clients, equality of access. Some may feel even safer, and you may have kind of time to think, and the client may have time to think to respond. But there are many, many disadvantages. No relationship plans, no immediacy, because the time lapse between the responses, limited interventions that you can do, increased possibility of being misconstrued and misunderstood, problem with confidentiality, and actually no presence. So mitigating disadvantages to this way of working, I just want to say, don't do it. I mean, sometimes writing, of course, emails or texting is good for practical issues, but and can be helpful occasionally, but it's kind of hit and miss. So this is something that we may leave for agony aunts to do. I wouldn't recommend, if you want to have that kind of magic of presence, I wouldn't recommend to do it as a main way of working. So this is one of that agony aunt things. And I just, in preparation for these sessions, I went last night on the chat GPT to see what would the chat GPT respond to something like that. So I typed this thing. And this was the answer from chat GPT. So can you beat that? Yeah, I find it really, really amazing and hilarious. So we are still not in a danger of being taken over by AI, but it may come to that point. These things will improve. So if there is one takeaway, a key takeaway to take from this talk, I would like to take this. If you don't bring magic to your session, not only will you be less effective, but at some point you will be replaceable by AI. And the greatest magic you can bring is the magic of your presence. Thank you. When you use those visual visualization, you don't need to be explicit with the client about that you're doing that. So there are two things, making implicit explicit in terms of like making what your assumptions that you're making about what client is saying or something like that explicit. So you're bring them to the open. But visualization is something slightly different. Visualization is like help to maintain, to create and maintain that sense of connection, that kind of sense that you're sharing the same space, even if you're not sharing the same space. You don't need to do that when you work face to face. It kind of happens spontaneously, but because we don't share physical space, you can use your visualization as an aid to help you create that mental space that you share with your client. Sometimes people imagine kind of almost imagine a rope, like a thread connecting themselves and the client. I don't do that. I don't do that because I think that kind of a relation is multidimensional, and thread indicates just one line, one kind of straight line of connection. So I really like to imagine, as I use that image throughout my presentation, I like to imagine a bubble. I just feel in a soap bubble with the client. And that, like sometimes happen with soap bubbles too, when they touch, they create a big one. That's what I imagine. Let me just compare this with something else. I don't know how many of you meditate. You may be doing mindful meditation or any other type of meditation. And what it's all about, what is one of the major things in meditation, is actually to get in touch with yourself beyond the veils of your mental constructs. So what I have in mind here, yes, you kind of try to bracket and exclude all the projections, everything that you project on the client and on yourself, but not to exclude yourself in order to actually be in touch with a real experience, things that you're really experiencing, rather than mediating that experience with those mental constructs. So you exclude the projection, but you include awareness of what's going on really inside you. So I can tell you what I actually am still doing, if possible at all. When I practice personal consultancy, I actually insist that we have at least first few sessions in person, and then we move online. Now, this is not always possible. This is not always practical. I mean, for various reasons. However, I would suggest you to take at least a few clients, if possible, face-to-face. Have few sessions face-to-face. If not for any other reason, to just experience that. Because once you experience that face-to-face, it's actually easier to experience that online. So you then that experience give you an anchor in it's like the lighthouse, so you know in what direction to go. My view, and I'm sure, I mean, other people may not share that, but it's really not very good. In my experience, it's not very good, because I used to teach face-to-face before the pandemic. On our program, it was face-to-face only. And then during the pandemic, we moved to online teaching, and then dual teaching, which was like half. So some students could join us online and some students in person. That was by far the worst. That was like unbearable as far as I'm concerned. because you divide your attention, and it's not that, you know, the students in the classroom and students online get kind of 50% each. You know, teaching online, just if everybody's online, it's a little bit better, but still, in my view, personal view, it can't be compared with teaching face to face, precisely because of what Nick was saying. I like to move, I like to interact, I like to engage. I wish, you know, I find like I'm now restless because I've been sitting for more than an hour and I wish I can actually talk with you, do some exercises as Anna recommended, and most of all, meet you in the corridor after the session and have a chat with you. None of these things, that's all fun. None of these things we can do when we are online. So it's just, if anything, I would say it's definitely more fun to actually teach, and I think it's more in-depth teaching when we do it face-to-face, and think of clients. So we are now back to, unlike many other courses, the integrative counseling and coaching is now back face-to-face, completely face-to-face. This is really an interesting question, an important question. And I just want to clarify that as far as I'm concerned, there's no paradox there. In fact, the really kind of firm boundaries are conducive, are necessary in order for us to kind of break, go beyond those boundaries between us, between the client and me. I need to establish around us a good boundaries in order, so that we so that we feel safe enough and free enough to open up and go beyond those boundaries between us. So it's just basically think about that as a different kind of boundaries. So my guess is that we need to stop at this point. Sorry, Anne, maybe some other time.